The official release of Baldur's Gate 3 is approaching quickly, and with each passing day, more and more people are trying out the early access version in anticipation for the full game. Now, no matter if you're trying out the early access or if you're waiting until the 3rd of August, a good idea would be to prepare yourself for this incredibly massive game. And so I've decided to put together a little list of various things to keep in mind as you start up your new adventure in Faerûn. Now keep in mind that some things on this list might be subject to change, but in general I think you'll be able to apply most of these tips in the full version as well. So getting right into it, the number one tip on this list is about the very beginning of the game with the character creation. Now, while you'll be able to pick any race and class combination in Baldur's Gate 3, I'd highly suggest that you try picking a race and subsequent subrace that'll be a good fit for the class you're planning to play. What I mean here is if you've decided to play as, let's say, a wizard, your primary stat to focus on is going to be intellect. A good fit for this class in that case would be the Mephistopheles Tiefling subrace, simply because you get both intellect and charisma as traits for being a tiefling and the mage hand cantrip. Of course, pretty much every class works excellent with any race, but if you're all about min-maxing your character, then this is actually a pretty important thing to remember. However, you will at some point unlock multi-classing in the full version, so you'll be able to experiment a lot with different ways on making your character as effective as possible. Tip number 2. Remember to kill the intro boss. Now this is especially important for barbarians, paladins, and fighters, but I generally suggest you do this anyway because you get rewarded with some really useful things early on in the game. Tip number 3. Always try to start your fights by surprising the enemy, and you do this by attacking before anyone's noticed you yet, which causes your enemies to be stunned and unable to move for the first round. This is why, in my opinion at least, the rogue is second to the barbarian when it comes to beginner friendliness, because, you see, besides being hard to detect while sneaking, rogues have access to sneak attacks, which are definitely the best type of actions to surprise your enemies with. The cool thing is, if you have a high stealth stat, you can sometimes keep your enemies perpetually surprised because they might fail to detect you several times in a row. Tip number 4. Always go high ground. If you're expecting a battle, have the rest of your team running up that hill beforehand. Hearing some strange singing in the distance, and put your ranged and magic users above on a cliff. Always, always, always abuse the high ground mechanic. I cannot stress this enough because, you see, you get a +2 bonus to your attack roll whenever you're attacking an enemy from above. Now this naturally goes both ways, so if you're facing an enemy that's shooting at you from an elevated position, make sure to reposition your team ASAP. Speaking of which, Misty Step is an incredibly good spell to keep on hand if you're playing as a magic user. Now while we're on the subject of using high ground to your advantage, this brings us to tip number 5, which is to abuse fall damage by shoving your enemies off of elevated positions. This mechanic is incredibly useful, and if you successfully push someone off of a cliff or into a hazard, like that of lava, you can usually expect them to take a lot of extra damage or just kill them altogether. And you won't even have to spend any actions or spell slots to do so. Some other excellent ways to push enemies off of cliffs is to use an upgraded Eldritch Blast for the Warlock class or the Thunder Wave that's available for Wizards, Sorcerers, Bards, and Druids, as well as the Eldritch Knight. However, one thing to have in mind is to make sure you don't push bosses or high-value targets into endless pits, because you won't be able to loot them if you do so. But if you can see the bottom, then you're good to go. Speaking of endless pits, tip number 6, do not jump into this pit specifically located in the Whispering Depths. Tip number 7. If you want to cheese the hell out of this game, then remember to quick save often. And I do mean very often, like literally between every encounter or dialogue scene. Now this is really important if you're looking to get the best possible playthrough, because if you fail a conversation check, your group didn't spot a particular secret out in the wilds, or maybe you just wasted all of your lockpicks to open a particular chest, you can simply reload the game and try again. Also, remember that you can name your save file so you can easily load back to a crucial point in your playthrough. Number 8, here's something else you should do between each encounter, and that is to rest up at your camp. Besides replenishing your health, actions, and spell slots, the camp is also where you'll engage with your group. One huge mistake I made on my very first early access playthrough was to completely skip talking to my party members between each camp visit, which meant that I missed out on some very crucial dialogue scenes that can actually affect your playthrough. So when you visit your camp, don't stress it. Instead, remember to check if any of your party has this exclamation bubble over their heads, because that means that they want to talk to you. Number 9. Now, I should have probably put this earlier on in the list, but hey, since we're talking about party members, remember to have a balanced class composition in your team. Now, this isn't something you have to do, because you can just pick your favorite characters and explore the game world with them, but I'd highly recommend having at least one healer, one tank, one spellcaster, and one rogue. So basically the classic RPG party composition. I say this because there are some really difficult encounters in the early game, and I suspect that the full game won't be any easier, so having a healer and a tank is pretty self-explanatory. Having a rogue with you at all times is incredibly important in my opinion, because this will allow you to not only surprise enemies, but also have an easier time unlocking doors and chests and whatnot. Hell, since you'll be using so many supplies to rest at your camp, I would say that having a rogue is basically a must, because someone like Asterion has a much easier time stealing an entire room full of supplies than someone like Shadowheart. Number 10. If you're looking to find a lot of hidden items and have an easier time with detecting traps, then having a party member with a high perception stat is invaluable. As a general rule, I almost always pick perception as one of my character skills, because you never know if you'll suddenly run into buried treasure. But if you don't have a high perception stat, then Asterion is an excellent party member to bring with you. And now, as number 10 was about finding buried treasure, number 11 is to always have a shovel in your inventory, because if you don't have a shovel, then you won't be able to dig up treasure from these big piles in the ground. Normally, you can find shovels in structures and ruins, but you can also buy one from the gnome vendor in the Druid Grove. Number 12. Send all your supplies to your camp. Now, I know this one might seem self-explanatory to some, but it's a small detail that's certainly easy to miss if you're a beginner. You can send items to a storage chest in your camp by right-clicking on the item in your inventory and simply clicking Send to Camp. This way, you won't have to be encumbered by a bunch of heavy items all the time, and you'll keep your inventory neat and tidy. Besides, you will have to do this at some point, because number 13, remember to loot everything. Or well, almost everything.
Your pilfering efforts have failed. Now you've a fight on your hands.
As soon as you see a box, wardrobe, chest, or other type of container with this little golden chest icon, then that means you haven't checked that container out yet. Not only will you be finding most supplies in various containers that you'll be needing for your camp, but sometimes you'll find some really cool stuff like gold, healing potions, various flasks, and even rare weapons and armor. So yeah, if you enter a room full of inconspicuous boxes, then remember to loot each and every one of them, no matter how much of a drag it is, because you'll regret it if you don't. And finally, number 14. Cloud of Daggers is an insanely good spell for casters, as it does tons of AoE damage and can completely deny the path of your enemies if you place it in a smart way. However, did you know that you can turn it off? In fact, you can turn off most spells that last for several rounds. And you're gonna want to do this after winning your battles. And as is the case with Cloud of Daggers, you won't have to worry about accidentally walking into a meat grinder while looting corpses, as you can simply click on this little icon on the caster's portrait right here to turn it off. But that does it for this list. I will probably make more tips and tricks videos in case you guys ask for it, and remember to comment below if you have any great tips of your own to share with the community. As always, thank you to all my wonderful Lensven Squad members for supporting the channel. You guys are awesome. Until next time, MrHulthen signing out.